we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Welcome to another episode of the Energy Impact Podcast. Our guest today is Jeanette Pablo, the Director of Climate Equity Initiative at the Clean Air Task Force. That's a fancy title for a fancy lady. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm a big fan, actually, of your podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, now you get to share your story with all the listeners. So before we get into all of the great work you're doing at the Clean Air Task Force, tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from?
Actually, I'm from Washington, D.C. My family's been here for a number of years, and it's a little bit unusual because, a lot of people are coming from for Congress or the government. But
you're a natural. You've been here the whole time.
Right. They call us cave dwellers, right?
Did you always know that you wanted to sort of be involved in policy and government, or is that just sort of a stereotype that's not fair?
No, I wasn't interested in that at all. In fact, I studied Soviet and East European affairs at UVA in college, and I was just completely fascinated by what was going on behind the Iron Curtain and how 1917 came about. There was actually very little information at that time, so I decided that, okay, I'm just going to go see it. So I decided to backpack through Eastern Europe from Poland to Yugoslavia by myself. And it was really incredible experience. I learned so much, and none of the information that was even available then was related to what was going on. And then a few years after college, I actually went back to Russia, and went to Uzbekistan to see what was going on with the Afghan war, which was really interesting because we were reading that there was just a paper that it wasn't really working to have Uzbekistan soldiers because they were actually sort of collaborating with Afghanistan. And so they were bringing white Russians. So there we are, like having the tea, and we see all these trucks of European Russians. So confirmation on that one.
Wow. Well, so yeah, tell us a little bit how that came about. Like, you're just in middle school and you're like, man, I'm fascinated by Eastern European studies. Like, or did you went backpacking and then you decided to major in it, or yeah, walk us through.
No, I decided to major. Well, so I was actually really interested in Nazi Germany in high school, and I think it was really because my father half Filipino and grew up in the Philippines, and he on the way back from Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombed the Philippines, and so he lived under occupation from 4th grade to 8th grade. And I think a big part of this interest was just trying to understand how these things could happen. And then I just became really fascinated by it. So actually a few years later, I went to China to see what China was like. And I went with a friend backpacking in southern China in January, and it was utterly fascinating. And again, not necessarily portrayed accurately in the very limited literature. And then I thought, all right, well, now I'm going to go see Israel and Egypt, two countries that are always in the news, and how that was going. So, what I would really say about that is these early experiences of understanding a range of cultures has been actually really useful in my career, because understanding why countries make different choices in terms of policies, it's very profound. And they make these choices different from, say, the US, which we can't really understand why people don't do things the way we think they should be doing.
Yeah, what a fascinating range of cultures, and maybe I would layer on an opinion of mine too, which is maybe poor etiquette here, but I feel like they do it differently at different points in time, right? Because so much is influenced by the last decade, which is sort of influenced by the previous decade, right? Sort of the echoes of history and culture sort of swirl together. So
Absolutely.
fascinating. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you had all of this, you had like the book knowledge, you went and saw it in person. What did you yeah, what did you do with it?
Well, I went to California because I thought, actually, I know a lot about Washington D.C. I don't really know. I mean, I've been to all these countries around the world, so what's California like? And so I went there, and I got my first career job, which was a fact-checking internship at Mother Jones magazine. And at Mother Jones, I actually learned, I think, two of the best skills that for my career, as it turned out. The ability to talk to anyone and to verify information that I was going to use or convey.
Mm.
And because people will give you information, they think it's accurate, but a lot of times the nuances are wrong. And if you're, let's say you're in the White House talking about clean air policy and regulations, you have to have really accurate information. You can't blow that. So so that was really useful. And I mostly did the crime beat. So I interviewed criminals, a lot of survivors of crime, and actually the reporter who traveled to Benigno with Benigno Aquino when he flew back to the Philippines and was assassinated on the tarmac. That was a really special project for me. And because I've already mentioned that. So the Philippine connection, and that was just an incredible experience. But
Yeah,
at Mother
wow.
Jones, I decided that I want to go do policy now, and that's when I kind of made that shift.
Okay, well, yeah, walk us. I'm sure we could spend a whole nother podcast on your Mother Jones experience, but walk us through that transition into policy.
Sure. Well, one thing that was interesting about Mother Jones was I realized that it took about 4 years for a Mother Jones article to get into the conventional press. Now, that's not the case now with the internet, but I would see these articles that I worked on, and I'm like, good God, we talked about that 4 years ago. So it was a really it was a great organization. So anyway, yeah, so I went back to DC, and I got a master's in international. Well, I studied international policy, and then I got a law degree. I was so far along past real jobs that I felt like I needed a law degree to kind of get back in the swing of things. So
But that's not an easy lift. That's like a big, you sort of said that like, oh, I just went and got a law degree. That's like a big, that's a big effort.
well, it was I would have done I would have gotten a business degree, but I'm terrible with math, and I know enough 2 years and 3 years, business and law, that I was like, okay, got to do the law. It turned out to be a great, a good idea. And so after clerkship, I joined, these mouthy law firms. I mean, Werner Lifford, Bernhard McPherson, and Hand. They're a bunch of Lyndon Johnson guys, and literally. And I worked on electricity issues, including the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. But that was also a time when pro bono work was becoming like really popular for law firms to do. And Rich Glick, a good friend, persuaded the law firm to adopt the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. And I spent 4 years representing women, almost always with children, who are being evicted from short and long-term housing for literally spurious violations. I had a perfect record of success, but had nothing to do with any capability on my own part. It just really was a demonstration of how inequitable it was for these families. Another pro bono project, they really jumped on board the pro bono scene, I worked on was representing the survivors of sexual abuse by Catholic clergy in Boston. That was all coming out at the time. And our goal was to have Congress pass a law to extend or eliminate the statute of limitations for survivors, because a lot of times they were like in their 50s before they were ready to deal with that publicly. But many of them were children so young that the 2 or 4 year statute of limitations meant they were still children. So we weren't successful, but actually pretty soon after our effort, a number of other states started picking up on the statute of limitations issue. I would say, I just looked it up this morning, this work is still going on. They're still working on making it a better situation. And I've actually been a supporter of SNAP since, I mean, that was like 92. Since then, and they're a great advocacy and support group for, they've expanded it from priests to all religious and institutional authorities. They really are amazing. So after leaving the firm, I continued with the legal clinic, but on the board. And frankly, I really preferred the actual advocacy work. But and I do want to do a shout out to Rich. He opened the doors to both young attorneys and many women and children without homes in DC. And he's probably a little bit more recognized as the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission from 2017 to 2022.
Yeah, really. You say the firm jumped in, but in my experience, it's always like an individual, right? The firm may have guidelines or requirements, but it always the individuals, do they have something they're passionate about? Are they willing to spend that time kind of diving in? And it sounds like, you were 2 feet in the deep end from day one.
It was great. I probably had too many hours on that.
But I'm sure it's like really rewarding to, you're like dealing with a lot of corporate litigation or corporate policy or policy papers to then have like a more tangible near-term impact on someone's life. I can see why that would be so powerful. And I'm extrapolating a little bit, so stop me if this is unfair, but seems to be sort of an escalating theme in your career, over the preceding decades.
Yeah, I think that's the case. We'll kind of get to that maybe a little bit later when I talk about my current work. But
yeah, great. Okay, well, yeah, sorry to jump ahead. I don't want to cut off
No.
all the. Okay, so from there, so you're working in law firm, you're doing this pro bono work, and you're getting exposure to energy and electricity policy at this time. Yeah, okay. How was it different from what you expected? I mean, you'd read some about it. You obviously saw these different cultures where you're like, holy cow, this is how it actually gets done.
Well, I have to say I was very lucky because I didn't have at our law firm some of the issues that women had in other law firms, some of my colleagues, and et cetera. They were a great group of people and even fun. The two heads of the energy practice were big bicyclists. So, we did a lot of that. And, I picked the electricity or the energy group because they were pretty, I was at that age, right? Pretty young, very innovative. They did their own legislative work and they did a really wide range of energy work. And I thought I can really find a place for myself here. And it was serendipitous. I mean, I really wasn't thinking energy was my thing, but it became that.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, timing wise, the deregulated market was still figuring out what the heck it was going to be when it grew up, right? I mean, you were doing
That's right.
the first of this and first of that, probably left and right.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a great time. I left the law firm. I decided I wanted to go in-house. Being from Washington, D.C., I was never going to get a job on the Hill. So I actually got a position with the Tennessee Valley Authority in their Washington office, and I was covering the airspace, and it was just an incredible time. So TVA was restarting their nuclear plants. Al Gore, who was from Tennessee, was vice president, and climate change was garnering more and more attention. And so this was 1995, and on Earth Day in '93. President Clinton announced, I think it must have been the first program to reduce greenhouse gases by 2000 to 1990 levels. And climate change was my jurisdiction. And the first event I had was a pledge of all the major electric utilities and public power, as well as corporate power, and TVA, which is a government corporation. And that's when I met Dirk Forrester, who became like my climate mentor. And like a couple of months later, he became the chairman of the newly formed White House Climate Change Task Force in the Clinton administration. So now, climate was front and center in the White House, which elevated it, and it just became a really exciting time on climate.
Yeah. What was the reaction like at TVA? All of those things you just described in, what is maybe stereotypically a little slower, less dynamic business. Like, did people listen to you? Did you face some pushback? Like, how did you kind of navigate those waters?
No, it was just the opposite. I mean, TVA, I can only speak for the time that I was there. They were incredibly innovative. They were one of the first major companies to have a trading floor. And, back in the day, you had like a big screen of TVs, and it was all the weather, because you could decide where you were going to need to sell or buy power based on the weather patterns, hot, cold, rain, et cetera. And it was great, because I tended to work mostly with the operations folks. And if, I got training on trading power. We had monthly meetings, and I got to see everything that the company was doing. I spent a lot of time actually trying to get the Bellefonte nuclear plant restarted down in Alabama. And that actually was a really interesting experience too, because you would say there were, economically disadvantaged communities down there. That plant would have made like an incredible difference to northern Alabama. And then that was also when the US government was kind of running, this is not the official description, but running out of tritium, which you need for nuclear plants, not nuclear plants, excuse me, weapons. And, a natural byproduct, depending on how you design it, I should say this a little differently, but there's a way to change your fuel tube so that you can produce tritium with a nuclear plant. And so we negotiated that with the Department of Energy, and it was, and I brought people down for tours of the plants. They ranged based on what status they were, and so we could actually go into containment and see what it was like. It was a really innovative, dynamic time, and I think the leadership at that time, it was Democratic, and the president was Democratic, so there was a good relationship there.
Yeah, definitely a unique relationship, really unique across almost every U.S. business, and certainly of the utilities, right? With TVA as a government corporation, has sort of a unique status in the space. So it must have been a really cool time to see that. And yeah, I always I love hearing those stories that you brought people in and were able to take tours of nuclear plants, because it's like such an easy, low-hanging fruit way to just sort of bring people in and show them it's just a steam cycle, right? Like it just seems like such an easy thing, but instead it's, I don't know. I wish we did more of that, but maybe we'll talk about that as some of your Clean Air Task Force work here later on.
Maybe.
Okay, well, so a little foreshadowing is always good. So before we get there, so you're at TVA. What caused the next iteration then of your career?
I decided to leave TVA and do some consulting. I will confess, I parted ways, not with TVA, but my new boss. And sometimes you just have a difference of opinion, and so I decided to go do more work consulting with other electric utilities on clean power plan, a lot of again, clean air and climate change work. And then about 3 years later, I got a call, like not in the middle of the night, but let's say 11 p.m. And it's like, hi, I'm from PNM Resources. I want to interview you for a job. And I'm like, okay, my friends are always playing practical jokes on me, and they know that one of the things I want to do is open a Washington office. And I'm like, is this a joke? So of course you can't take any chances. So I call him up, and he's like, yes, we want you to come to New Mexico and interview. And it was apparently on the recommendation of somebody I had worked with. And so I got the job and opened the Washington, D.C. office. And that was an incredibly pivotal time. Let's see, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 was just enacted, and energy and climate was really hot. And soon thereafter, Jeff Sturba, who was the CEO at the time, he was a huge proponent of mandatory greenhouse gas reductions, and as well as the need for new technologies to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, does that sound a little familiar, like these days even, right?
Yeah.
So somebody from GE came to my door and said, we want to start a coalition of environmental groups and companies, and the CEOs of each group are going to be the leaders. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure, let's do it. And that became the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, which I think was the first time any environmental groups and corporates, certainly at the high level, developed a coalition. It was launched in 2007 with a call for action, which publicly committed to mandatory climate reductions. And 2 years later, in January of 2009, they published a blueprint for legislative action, which became the Waxman part, to a certain extent, the Waxman-Markey bill. And I know a lot of people were very disappointed with the results. I was as well, but I'm completely convinced that US CAP was a huge mover of climate policy action going forward. It accelerated what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think people often we're prone to resulting, right? And it's like, oh, well, the thing we wanted to happen didn't happen, but nothing really happens that way, right? It's like,
that's right.
It's like a trickle of moment, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, we always knew that would be the case, and that's almost never true either, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, so fantastic. Okay, so you were give us a little more context on this time. So this was pre-shale gas. So sort of coming out of Clean Tech 1.0, just prior to the financial crisis, right, of 07, 08. And here you were opening an office and creating like the first climate change sort of impact in the US. That's pretty
cool. People were doing this, but it was a great opportunity for me. And I loved working with Jeff Sturba. He was a real visionary and not afraid to take chances. I mean, there were no guarantees. One difference I think between back then and now is that the ambition was there, but the technologies were not in the pipeline to achieve the kind of goals that we need. And now we do have a big number of technologies in the pipeline. I'm not saying they're, you flip the switch and they're going to start, but we have a lot of, as they say, tools in the toolbox, or about to get in the toolbox, that I think we have a better chance of being successful because of that dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting zooming out over the last 20 years, right, to sort of see how that's evolved in the US, and to see how some of those themes have evolved and maybe caught up or leapfrogged the US in other countries. It must be fascinating for you to think about how those cultures like react to different drivers in different ways, right? Like, because I almost feel like we may have more technology options, but I feel like we're sort of, we just have so much more bureaucracy than we did maybe 20 years. Like, I feel like we're also strangling our our right hand is holding back our left hand a little bit. Maybe that's unfair. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that statement. Whereas other countries maybe are still a little more open, and others are trying to become more open, but are struggling for other historical reasons.
It's just, it's different. Like, different systems can do different things. you know, what the U.S. has achieved in the current administration with legislation on climate change and infrastructure is, I think, not literally, but close to being unprecedented, certainly in recent times. At the same time, you know, the major carbon capture deployment has taken place in a number of places outside the US. There are a couple of examples here maybe, but we do have like the market, you know, the limitation associated with the market going up and down and determining whether something stays or doesn't stay. You know, there's another country that has done a really interesting situation with nuclear, and which incorporates, if I recall correctly, nuclear waste management associated with the plant. So, you know, I've been to Yucca Mountain 3 times, beginning, middle, and end. And, you know, we still don't have a solution.
Yeah, well, I have a whole nother set of opinions on that, but we can put that maybe maybe we'll have a little time to get to that. Mostly around what we mean by solution and what we're trying to accomplish. But
Good. I look forward to it.
Yeah. At some point we can take it offline and have drinks and sort of debate on that too. But okay, so so you have this policy view, you then are working with a couple of different utilities over a pretty dramatic change in the macro environment. You had this initial setback. Yeah, how'd you move forward from that?
Well, so I was at P&M for 10 years.
Okay.
And I thought, this is, you know, I love the people. I love New Mexico. It's a great company to work with. And so you know, one night in, you know, May, I didn't get a phone call. I got a text, an email. And then like Melanie Kenderdine, who I'd known since the Clinton administration, she was at DOE. She was now the executive director of the newly created Office of Energy Policy and System Analysis at DOE, right? So she sends me an email. She said, "Can we talk?" I'm like, it's 10:30. Like, okay. I said, sure. Talk tomorrow. I said, sure. She says, how about right now? I said, sure. And she says, I'm about to start work on a major electricity project, and I need an electricity expert. I'd like you to come join me. And, you know, I always have like the same answer no matter what. I said, I'm really honored. And, you know, I'd love to hear more. And then I get off the phone. I'm like, really? Am I going to do that? And all my, you know, my mentors and friends were like, why would you go back to DOE? Go to DOE, you know, like you're mid-career, blah, blah. And I just thought about it and I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I was started as a senior advisor, and then I was acting deputy director for energy systems, which included electricity policy, North America energy policy and security, and critical materials. And I mean, it was really hard, but it was really wonderful, as those things often can be.
What made it hard? Yeah, what made it hard?
What made it hard? There was so much we wanted to do and not enough time to do it. So, I had never really managed a team. So, I driving up, it was like a 45-minute drive. And so driving up, I listened to these podcasts on management, and it was very specific. I did that for 2 years, and it made a huge difference. I stopped hiding from my staff and started like having productive meetings, and they were great, amazing people to work with. So, so that, you know, that worked out. And I also got to be involved in the 2017 U.S.-Mexico electric reliability bilateral principles. It's sort of a mouthful, but basically that was the framework for the first cooperative relationship between Mexico and the North American NERC, I think, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, because, you know, now we're starting to think about like the transmission lines a lot more, and we're, you know, we're like riveted on them now. So it was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it must have felt a little more holistic, right? Where before you were
Yeah.
sort of coalition building, now here you were really at the front of the ship a little bit, which I guess is the terrifying part, right? You're sort of, now you've got this team like steering the boat that you've got to point and direct.
You just, you saw and learned things. It was like I mean, I don't have a PhD, but I imagine it would be like a PhD, like the conversations, the briefings in the morning, the range of people and expertise that was there. The leadership of Secretary Moniz was, it was just extraordinary. And yeah, I think I've loved all my jobs, not every minute of them, but I think that was my favorite. I'm not including my current one, obviously.
Yeah, key disclaimer on the bottom. But okay, well, a great segue. Okay, so you were at the DOE for a couple of years, and then what brought you ultimately to the Clean Air Task Force?
Well, so the administration changed, and my term was up, and I was actually then invited to join the Energy Futures Initiative. And that was founded by Ernest Moniz, 13th Secretary of Energy, Joe Heesier, who is the CFO at DOE, and Melanie Kenderdine. And talk about the dream team. And so I went there, and I was the general counsel for 4 amazing years. We worked a lot with clean energy startups, a lot of analysis and possibilities associated with technologies, and it was great. But then, there came a time that current president was elected, and I thought, I want to go back into policy. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go to the administration. The secretary supported me on that. And Armin Cohen, who is the executive director, maybe he's the president now, but and Clean Air Task Force. I've known him for a million years, and he's like, I know you want to go to the administration, but I'd like you to come work for me. And I'm like, oh, I've never really done work for an environmental organization. And I have like 20 letters from my applications when I graduated from college to NRDC. Everybody, I have all the rejection letters up in the attic. And I thought, well, maybe maybe here's my chance. So, he invited me to lead an entirely new initiative, which was to explore how climate organizations and environmental justice organizations can work together to address common concerns. And even though there's many opposing views between the two parties, right? Mm. And I felt like Clean Air Task Force was really suited for this venture. They're a global climate organization, but their origins are in air pollution, which is central to many of these communities' challenges. And Armand, it's going to sound a little ridiculous, but it's true. He's just a fearless visionary. He is not afraid to take on and try new policies, or he's never been, Clean Air Task Force has never been, and this is a compliment, mainstream or conventional. And it's a real strength for the organization. So, I was like, well, okay.
It's your chance to be a little bit of a pirate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, okay, so you saw this opportunity, and a little bit of a callback to some of your pro bono days, right? Like this sort of,
right.
The sort of climate equity concept is still relatively young. So yeah, tell us about what's your role specifically, and how have you sort of shaped that aspect of the organization?
So the first thing I would say is I am not an environmental justice leader or expert, and I'm an analyst. I'm sort of a fixer, and but I really wanted to do this work and hopefully at least make an impact, with kind of a beginning, like a running start. And the motivation is actually for the initiative is that a lot of there's a huge divide between climate organizations and environmental justice communities. They're just really different. And so a lot of times climate solutions are developed without any consideration of impacts to communities and residents' lived experiences. And what that really means is then the policies lack critical success elements, right? And sometimes the climate projects fail, and a lot of times it just perpetuates injustice, which is already historic. So I was very inspired, and hoping to make a some kind of contribution. I actually spent 4 months kind of sitting at my desk trying to figure out, like, how do we approach this challenge? And I came up with a cluster of a starting place. I decided that we would do lit reviews on environmental justice communities, federal and state policies associated with it, and then the impacts of conventional air pollution. We needed like a baseline, where the whole team, which was me at the time, but would have a common understanding, and then we could all kind of grow together. And we also did. So also, I was going to, incorporate interviews, and this is going to sound, super fascinating, but watched a lot of webinars where, with COVID, a lot of public meetings became webinars, and listening to those meetings was highly instructive. And then in September, invited 3 just incredible people to the team. Kara Hubbing, who is, her background is state and federal policy. Grace Linzer is a human rights expert, I would say. And then Pargal Arab is a atmospheric science and air quality person. So it kind of like a perfect combination. And we did about 50 interviews. We probably about 50 webinars. And, you learn things like there's a federal agency, they have a webinar, which is a public meeting. They're trying to portray something with a PowerPoint. You can, a lot of people actually are on the phone because they don't have internet access. And so, I mean, there was just some really interesting observations. And we also commissioned a survey of residents in environmental justice communities with BW Partnership. And they're the ones who do the annual U.S. Energy and Employment Report for the Department of Energy. A huge step was creating the Climate Equity Advisory Committee. And this was consisted of environmental justice leaders and experts, as well as a couple of progressive clean energy members. And
reporting into the Clean Air Task Force, or is this for a separate, like for a government organization or a separate?
No, this was just
your
us.
Group. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah, this was just the 4 of us, and then soon thereafter, I would say, Desmond Johnny joined us. He was already at Clean Air Task Force, but and he actually is an environmental justice leader in his own right. And so we went down this road, and the survey was the first thing that we got a draft of, and we presented it to the advisory committee, and they're like, this is really helpful, but what you need to do is, not discontinue your research. You need to just go into communities. And we're like, okay. So we chose 3 communities to work with. We actually chose 7, but I underestimated how much a commitment you were making to working with the community. And so 3, and 1 in Louisiana, a rural, 2 communities in Cancer Alley, and 1 was in New Jersey, an urban area with urban community with 100 toxic waste sites, 4 square miles, and then 3 chapters in the Navajo Nation near Shiprock, New Mexico. So we had, a tribal, a rural, and a urban, none of which would be emblematic of a large group within that category, but we're trying to see what similarities might be, what possible solutions might be common or not. And so we're releasing, okay, I've got to count this now, 5 papers this year,
Wow.
including the survey. 3 of them are on community benefits plans and agreements, which are a really hot topic now. And it's a relatively new concept at the federal level and for many companies, and a lot of interest in, like, okay, well, I'm a company, I'm an energy company, I've got jobs, I'll do a jobs thing. But one of our surveys coming out at the end of the month indicated that actually a lot of communities, or some of the communities, are not really interested in wind, in solar panels or EVs or clean energy jobs. There's not a lot of familiarity with that. What they really want is they want green spaces, playgrounds and recreation centers where communities can get together. They want contributions to they want senior citizen centers. There's a lot of health related needs associated. A lot of times there's not even a hospital in the area. So it's we've all learned an enormous amount. And then next year we'll be publishing the community reports, which will be, in these communities, the 3 of them, we've done a lot of focus groups, interviews, street engagement. So it sort of offsets it gives you a broader range when you're just sitting on the street talking to people, and observation. What does the environment look like in this area? Are the trash cans filled? All kinds of stuff.
Amazing. And where can people go to find all of these papers? Will this be on your website?
It's going to be on. So
Okay.
yes, all the papers will be on the website. We did one. It's actually kind of a sequence. So we start with a survey, learn a little bit. Then the next one was just earlier this week on Tuesday, understanding disenfranchised and underserved communities and the 7 attributes and compounding. You may be in an environmental justice community, but you may also be an elderly person, a senior citizen. You may be someone who identifies as disabled. You may be LGBTQ+, and that compounds your already difficult challenges. The 3 community benefits papers are going to be launched on November 28th. And one of them was actually with a collaboration with the Columbia University Climate School. We worked with some students there who wrote that paper. So that was a really exciting experience. And then the rest next year.
That's awesome. Yeah, does it feel like you're kind of creating, I'm sure you're focused very much on the daily work and there's a lot to get done, but do you ever step back and sort of think, I'm kind of creating, this is a bit of a theme in your career, but you're sort of creating the blueprint for what this conversation looks like a little bit?
Yes. We've learned a lot. And, I think probably community engagement is not very well understood. You're working with communities who have no reason to trust you based on their historic experience. And, we have like this protocol. So we all start with a dinner when we meet with the communities, no PowerPoints, no agenda, just sitting around and talking to people. And kind of we go from there. And, we're transparent about the technologies that we support a Clean Air Task Force, which many of these communities are not in favor of. And so, we're just upfront about it. And these communities are very sophisticated, very smart. They have a lot of victories, just not enough victories to clean up everything that, is going on in their community. And it's really an honor to be able to work with them.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and we're lucky as a nation that you're putting that work in as well. maybe tell us a little bit, keeping an eye on the clock here, what other activities are you looking forward to over the next 2, 3, 5 years, as you continue to shape what this climate equity effort looks like?
Well, first I have to say my team they do almost all the work. They are fantastic. And I'm learning from them more, I think, than they are learning from me. But sure, okay, so this is kind of a nerdy thing, but it's top of mind. I really want to talk more about the concept of clean electricity. It's used as a synonym for carbon-free or greenhouse gas-free, but I personally believe this is deceptive and insulting to the communities who are dealing with the health impacts of SOx, NOx, mercury, PM, etc. And as long as we use that as a synonym, we're just not going to move forward. It's not accurate, and it's not respectful. I think I'm going back to maybe what you were thinking about on nuclear, but the next term I want to talk about is clean energy. This is very problematic. There is no such thing as clean energy. Every source of energy has challenges, and especially when you think of cradle to grave, limiting our greenhouse gas emissions, accounting to just the electricity produced by a given technology, ignores all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with development, construction, and decommissioning. If we're not counting those, we're not really, it's going to be harder to meet our goals. Supply chain, that's another one. Not only is it really important for energy security. I mean, you could talk all afternoon about the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the impacts energy-wise on the EU. So supply chain is really important, and there's a lot of equity and human rights issues there. Like, we need to be aware of things like the child labor. Like, I'm looking at my computer and cell phone and electric vehicles, driving down the road, and I'm like, did the cobalt in these devices come from a 5-year-old in a mine? You can't really walk away from that.
Yeah. Well, and there's different levels. You sort of hit on two just very different themes in supply chain, right? Because, I think people confuse fuel security, anything with a just-in-time type delivery, versus, equity within that supply chain, right? Which is more of a nuclear or a wind or solar or battery problem. Those are two very critical problems around supply chain and energy security, but they're two very different problems, right?
It's always complex.
Yeah.
Just surrender to that reality. It's always complex. But if we don't know it and we don't acknowledge it, we can't do anything about it.
But how do you think, even going way back to your time at Mother Jones, right, where you said, it was a 4-year delay cycle. Well, I think the cycle is maybe a month, where it's like Scientific America, The Economist, and then mainstream news, right? But have we lost the ability to have nuanced and detailed conversation about something so complex?
I don't think so. I think instead of things coming our way back in the day, so to speak, we have to make a choice on what kind of information we access and what we're going to follow up on, right? I mean, and I'm not anti-AI, but I do notice, I'm like, I'm on my phone, and somehow I get dragged into the hiker lost in the mountain, and then the next week I'm like, oh my gosh, all these people are getting lost in the mountains. I'm like, no.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's not that at all. It's that I indicated an interest, and so now I'm getting more of these, and maybe the ads think they have a better chance of me being interested in them. And so but I would say that we are really have to make and be very conscious of making choices.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's sort of where I was going on the nuclear front, right? On people say create a long-term solution, but they that's a policy solution. It's not really a technical one, right? Like it would be better to spend money on shark-proof underwear than it would be on like additional, you know what I mean? Like from a relative
Right.
basis perspective.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, how, knowing that it's so complex and so enormous too, right? Like people, I think, woefully underestimate the size of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, how do you like keep waking up and attacking that every day? I mean, knowing that like you're sort of hitting at different points, like, yeah, I don't know. How do you manage knowing all of that and still like knowing that you can also make like a really concrete near-term difference with some of the work that you're doing?
Well, it's just so rewarding to be working in a space that you think will be beneficial to a broader, a broader good. And, you can get overwhelmed about everything, right? Like, your laundry or something. But, you know, um, it's like, so climate change it's a little bit like building a cathedral back in the olden days. It's a multi-generation, it's a constant commitment, and the end is worth it.
But I'll pick on you. I'll use your own words against you, right? It's actually not
Okay.
climate change, it's sustainability, right? It's actually
Yes,
like 3 times
that's right.
larger than climate change.
Yes.
Which the rest of your comment I think is still absolutely true, right? But
Right.
I think that's it's a really profound. I'm picking on you a little bit because the point you made I think is really profound. We almost always are using the wrong language. It almost always causes us to focus on the wrong problems, and we're never going to get the right solution if we haven't defined the right problem.
Right. I mean, the sustainability is a tricky one too, because a lot of times sustainability is associated with specific technologies. But
See,
when you think,
yeah, maybe. I think renewable is a scientist-specific technologies, right? Which is really a holdover of peak oil from what, late 90s, 2000, right?
yeah,
Like renewable
right,
is like a made up, renewable is like a totally wrong problem, is a totally old problem that we were trying to solve. I think about sustainable as being at least a systems description for how much can we get out for the least amount of stuff in, right?
yeah, yeah, but you
Which is
really have
unfit. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
you really have to count your, everything associated, positive and negative, with your supply chain and cradle to grave.
Yeah, for sure. And the supply chain, at least, is like a technical thing. What you're talking about is even one derivative harder, which is that broader sort of equity component, which, like, how the hell do you measure? It's got to go somewhere, right? It's got to be like the infrastructure has to exist in some physical point in space that will disadvantage some, it'll maybe advantage a property owner and that it'll be a windfall. It maybe disadvantages someone else. They have to look at it, right? Like, I don't know how to balance and weigh these measures. I'm fascinating to read how you interpreted all of these things in the reports that you described.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's no perfect. I guess the perfection is going to be through, gently defined, is going to be through collaboration between policymakers, clean energy startups. We already know we don't like that word, and communities,
Yeah.
because we all navigate compromise. What we don't like is being the only one to have to make the compromise. And, I think that's something worth talking about.
Yeah, fascinating. I think we just got our tagline for the episode.
Oh,
That was excellent. Yeah, no, totally right. Totally right. Okay, yeah, well, again, we could, there's probably 100 different ways we could take this, but being cognizant of time, do want to sort of wrap up with giving you the opportunity. Anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure to hit?
okay. So I love the federal government in a, normal kind of way. But, one of the things coming that I would like to spend time on is I would like to do an examination of, we didn't have time to do it this year or last year. It's too big, but do an assessment of federal programs designed to help vulnerable populations writ large, and figure out, like, what's the low hanging fruit we can fix. So, 911, this is anecdotal, We haven't like confirmed all of it, but 911, I have looked it up. It does have researchers, contractors for a wide range of languages. But actually, one of the criticisms we heard is you have to use the word of your language in English to get connected. So you have to say Spanish, not Espanol, in order to get connected. And that's just kind of the beginning. Another language issue is food stamp application. So the and Spanish is like the second, most widely. Imagine like any other language, right?
Yeah, sure.
So the instructions are available in Spanish, but the online form is only in English. And as somebody who just tried to worked on getting a visa to Dubai, I have an even better understanding of how frustrating, and mine was easy.
Yeah.
How frustrating that is for food stamps.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if the first thought that popped into my mind is, just add the number of words, like at least for 911, add the number of words that would get you to that line. But the second thing that popped into my head was, no, just use like an art, like almost like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or something. You could probably use artificial intelligence to do real-time translation, right? Like what they use at the UN or something like that. And then you wouldn't have to have separate or duplicative call centers to actually receive those calls.
If they even have that contract.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a separate. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
no, I mean, some of these solutions are actually pretty easy, not to be glib, but there is a future where these solutions will be able to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, on your point, there's some low-hanging fruit that doesn't require a lot of activity that can, let's just do those things first. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Hey, wow. Well, yeah, you really got a lot on your plate over the next few years. I'm excited to see what you come up with.
Yeah, me too.
Well, amazing. Thank you again so much for coming on, and looking forward to supporting your work moving forward.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.